Hey, good morning, Pinelake family. I want to welcome all of you and everybody joining us online or across the state this morning. I am excited to be a part of the next installment in our series in Voices of Pinelake this summer. If you have a Bible, 2 Kings chapter 4 is where we'll be, Old Testament, 2 Kings chapter number 4. I want to tell you a story about a guy named Harvey Wilcox. Harvey was a real estate developer in the Midwest, a very wealthy man, and Harvey was a Jesus-loving man. And there was a vision that God gave him and his family to take all of those things, all of his resources that were vast and his heart for Jesus that was vast, and take it out to the West Coast. That they're underdeveloped part in the late 1800s, kind of still getting up off of its feet there, and not really much gospel or church saturation whatsoever on the West Coast in this day. And God just put it on Harvey's heart to say, hey, I want you to take all of your resources, your family, and anybody who will go with you to go start a gospel movement on the West Coast. And so he purchased a great deal of land just northwest of downtown Los Angeles and really began to invite families to come with him. He was so committed to the vision that anybody who wanted to join him in that mission and come move their family with him, he would give up a piece of land to them so that they would be able to live there on the land and be able to join them in the mission. Again, catalyzing a gospel-centric movement that would reach the West Coast and maybe even the world through the efforts and the resources of Harvey Wilcox and his family. That's the vision. And he gives his wife the task of naming this massive neighborhood, this parcel of land, this plot that he has bought. And she thinks about it for a minute, and then she names it after her favorite Midwestern estate, an estate called Hollywood. That's right, the Hollywood that you have come to know so well was originally intended to be the epicenter of a gospel-centric movement that would change the world for Jesus. Can we just say it fell short of the founder's vision? And I wonder if maybe you've been there, not Hollywood, that you've been somewhere where you had a vision in your minds, a version of events, a way that something was going to go, and then you ended up disappointed. There was something that maybe even the Lord put on your radar, something that you felt like he was doing, or maybe a vision that you had for your family or for your job or for your career or whatever it might be, and you just had this version of events. This is the plan. This is how it's going to go, and then it just didn't happen that way. Things that used to bring you so much hope and life and excitement now just produce disappointment, and you look longingly at what could have been. Maybe you're in a situation right now that it's just not the way you would have drawn it up. It's just not the way that you would have seen it coming, and there's no world where you expected to feel the things that you feel right now and be sitting in the middle of the things that you are sitting in right now. Something didn't go the way that it was planned, and you've been left with the question, what am I supposed to do with this? I think this feeling might be more pervasive in the rooms that you and I find ourselves in than we might realize. Here's what I mean. A couple weeks ago, I spent some time teaching at a camp for student ministry in North Carolina at a place called Ridgecrest, and there was 50 or 60 churches that kind of came together and did camp together at a place called, with a camp called Fuge. And I get to be a camp pastor from time to time with them, and one of the mornings is reserved for time for me to get to spend kind of humanizing myself a little bit for the group leaders there, and them getting to know me. I kind of tell my story and try to encourage them as I can. And so there came this morning, it was a Wednesday morning, and I went over and I sat with these adults that were kind of responsible for taking as many teenagers home from camp as they brought to camp, and that was kind of their job for the week. And so I'm sitting with these leaders, and I do my spiel of just trying to encourage and uplift them and kind of give them the gift of hope towards the end of the week. And I just am about to close the time, and I just sense the Spirit say, hey, ask them if there's any specific ways to pray. I was kind of to the concluding point, and I just kind of said, I'll pray us out. But before I do, is there anything that anybody wants us to pray for? And I'll just be honest with you, I was not prepared for what came next. Because what came next, after about 30 seconds of awkward silence, A man stood up in the front and said, "My son's been sick for the last couple of months, and my wife called this morning, and they're at the hospital, and they want to start him on a feeding tube because they're not sure that he can sustain life without it." About 10 seconds later, another man behind him stood up and said, "Our church is hurting right now. Our pastor of over 20 years died unexpectedly 3 weeks ago. I'm the only other staff member, and I don't know what to do." Man stood up on the other side of the room and said, "My wife left me last month, and I didn't want to be alone. Our youth pastor just invited me to come to camp with him, so I didn't have to be alone in my own house." Another woman stood up and she said, "My brother's going to prison next month, and I'm responsible for his kids for the next 7 to 10 years. And then maybe the most heartbreaking situation, a woman stood up and said, "There's a girl here this week in our youth group who 2 months ago held her best friend as she died after being struck by a vehicle at the beach. What I didn't realize is the room that I was in was filled with people who were in a situation that seemingly had no solution." What do we do when we don't know what to do? What do we do when we're in a situation that requires intervention from the Lord? What do we do when days get desperate? Where do we turn? How do we respond? 2 Kings chapter 4, we find a woman whose story will inspire answers to those questions. She asked the same ones at some point in her life. And I think if we zoom in there for just a moment, there are maybe 3 or so lessons at least that we can learn from. And when we face these same situations and when we have to ask the same questions, 2 Kings 4, beginning in verse 1 says this: "One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, 'My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves.'" This widow, we don't know her name, but we do know that she's a widow in a patriarchal society, which means the rights of men were preferred and were promoted and were privileged, and the rights of women were not. The rights of women were limited at best. She is in a vulnerable position from multiple angles. We don't know exactly why she is in the financial crisis that she's in. The Bible does say that it was her husband's debt that the creditors have come to settle. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe it's their debt they had together. Maybe it's just like it is to some people in the modern world that creditors just take advantage of people in vulnerable positions. We don't know what the story is there, but to be a widow in the ancient world was to be in a vulnerable and a dangerous place. She's lost her husband. She's lost her resources, and now she's about to lose the only thing she has left, is her kids. She's found what many people would call rock bottom. It doesn't get darker than this. And what does she do? She cries out to Elisha for help. This word for cries out, it literally translates an urgent cry that insists on a response. It's not just a, "Hey, if anybody's got any time." No, she's making a scene here. And I'm demanding that somebody step into this situation with me. And right here out the gate, we find the first example, the first lesson that we can learn when we're faced with circumstances that we can't seem to find our way through. And that is to acknowledge your condition. The primary requirement for a miracle in your life is your own recognition that you need one. You have to come to the place where you realize and admit you cannot fix it on your own. Plans A, B, and yet even C have to fail you. Desperation has to set in, and it's when that desperation sets in and your honesty takes over that you have to choose to resign from the position of boss of your situation, because your resignation is God's invitation. When you say, "Hey, I've tried, and I can't seem to find a way forward. I'm sitting in this mess and I can't seem to find a way out. I've tried everything I know how to do on my own and it's failed me. My friends have failed me. My advice from other people has failed me, and my own plans and strategies have failed me, and I am out of gas. It's when you take your hands off the wheel and God is able to step in and take over. It's simple, but it ain't easy. Right, our human condition, our pride can get in the way sometimes. That sense that I have a hard time admitting when I'm weak, when I'm not strong enough to handle it on my own. Our independence. I'm wired to just not ask people for help. I don't want to be a burden on anyone, or I just want to keep control the best that I can, and so I'm not going to open myself up to anybody else to help. My shame. Maybe some in the room today, you're sitting in a situation that you could actually honestly say, hey, I'm in a product of my own making right now. I'm laying in the bed that I made. And there's a shame element that says, I'm just not willing to say that out loud yet. I don't want to open myself up to the vulnerability that requires. Maybe for others, denial. I'm just going to look the other way and I hope that it gets better. Hope is a poor strategy. Maybe for me, for you, maybe you're like me, mine is impatience. D.A. Carson said the reason the Christians don't like praying for patience is because it assumes that you'll be placed in a situation you don't like. And for me, even if I can't seem to find a path forward, if I turn it over to God, my timing and his timing might be different. He's eternal, I'm 32. We're probably going to have different perspectives on things. But I'm not sure that I really want to let go of the reins. This woman had to come to a place where she set all of those things aside. Whatever it was for her that might have kept her from being honest about her condition, what was really going on, she had to put away so that she could step into what God had for her. And if we want God to move on something in our lives, we have to do the same. So she makes her condition known. In verse 2, the Bible says, what can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in the house? Nothing at all except a jar of oil, she replied. And Elisha said, verse 3, borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask, the olive oil you have, into the empty jars, setting each one aside once it's been filled. So the woman lays out her situation, tells Elisha everything she knows about everything, and Elisha responds with a question. He says, what do you already have? What are we working with here? What's on the inventory? What do we have at our disposal? And she says, one small jar, flask of oil. And then his response is to give her a job. He tells her what to do next. And notice, he doesn't tell her what he's going to do next. He tells her what she has to do next. Zooming in a little bit closer, the second lesson we can learn once we're honest with our condition, we take it to the Lord, and then we listen for God's direction. We acknowledge our condition, and then we listen for God's direction. When we lay something before God, we ask him to move, we ask him to speak, ask him to guide us or to do something miraculous, there are two traps, at least two, maybe more, but at least two, that I think we have to make sure we do our best to not fall into. The first trap is the trap of sitting out. Sitting out, what do I mean? It's the posture of, here, God, take this. I need you to do this. Call me when it's done and I'll come back and get it. Notice Elisha doesn't just say to the widow, I'll take care of it. He doesn't just hand her some money and move on. He doesn't try to negotiate with the creditors and try to help her situation just in the immediate. He doesn't give her a handout. He doesn't do anything except, as a representative of God, give her something to do. He gives her ownership in what would be a miracle. He gives her a responsibility to hold. He tells her to go collect the jars, a bunch of other jars from other people, take what little oil she did have and pour it out. Don't miss it. Elisha tells her to take the only thing she has left and give it back to God. He asked her not for oil, he asked her for faith. And the evidence of that faith was going to be found in her work. When I was in 8th grade, I was so excited. I was gifted by my parents one of those really fancy like graphing calculators. They were kind of new on the scene. They looked like you could launch a spaceship from them. And so I had gotten this calculator. It's the kind where you could just plug the formula in on your paper exactly as it sat and make sure you put all of the letters and the numbers, which I'm a proponent, letters and numbers shouldn't ever be together. But you plug everything in, you hit the enter button, it spits out the answer. If it's a graph that's the answer, it graphs it for you. If it's an equation or a formula that's the answer, then it prints that out on the calculator too. If it's just a simple like, hey, I'm not sure what 7 times 4 is, it prints that out for you too. And I was so excited, and I sat down in my 8th grade class that very next Friday, and my 8th grade teacher, Miss Nancy Britt, I hope she's not watching right now, and so she sat down at her desk and said, it's pop quiz time, and I'm thinking, buddy, am I ready for this? And so she hands the quizzes out, and I just begin to mow this thing down. I'm typing everything that I can. I'm lining everything up, make sure I've got all the letters and numbers in order. I hit enter, boom, there's the answer. I write it down. I'm running smooth through this quiz. They're going to name a building after me here by the end of this thing. I turn the quiz in, go home for the weekend, come back on Monday. She hands out the quiz grades, and mine has a big red 0 on the top right corner. And I'm immediately confused. I'm thinking through, did I misread the instructions? Did I not type the formulas in right? I was pretty careful to type the form. And then I'm thinking, did my parents get me like the Temu version of the calculator? Like, is it their fault? Like, what's the deal here? So I walk up to Miss Britt's desk and I said, Miss Britt, what's the problem? What did I do wrong? And then she said, you didn't show your work. And I said, but Miss Britt, did I get the wrong answers? And then she said this, she said, no, you got the right answers, but you didn't learn anything. And it's sitting in an 8th grade math classroom that Miss Nancy Britt teaches me a lesson that growth doesn't happen with quick and easy answers. Growth happens in the process. I think I'd say it this way. In my experience, God is more interested in growing your faith than meeting your expectations. Sure, he can do those things. He's able to do, but Ephesians 3 would say, exceedingly more than you could ever ask. But his aim is not your problem. His aim is your heart. What am I saying to you? If we aren't careful, we can become so focused on what we want God to do in our situation that we miss what he might be trying to do in our soul. That there are things that he's trying to till up in us that only happen in this environment when we're faced with a choice to say, am I going to listen to God? Sometimes God's response to our prayers is intervention. He steps in and just makes a way where there seemed to be no way. He intervenes, but other times he instructs. It's not intervention, it's instruction. God puts something in front of you that he needs you to have the faith to go do. We can't afford to sit out. The second trap, I think, is similar. It's what I'll call zoning out. One of the first things you learn in premarital counseling is there is a difference between hearing and listening. Hello, somebody. Throughout the Old Testament, in God's interactions with Israel, he would use a word that had a double meaning. It was the Hebrew word Shema. And it literally could be used interchangeably to mean both listen and obey. It wasn't just hear what I'm saying to you. It was listen with the intent of acting. Parents, here's the example. When you look at your child and say, you're not listening to me, what you're really saying is you're not obeying me. And so what will happen? We'll take things to God, we'll pray, and we'll ask him to do something, and then we can get frustrated when he doesn't do it on our timetable and in our timing. And then we look at him and go, are you listening to me? And he goes, yeah, but are you listening to me? You see, prayer is a two-way street. Prayer is not a monologue. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation. You do know when you pray, you're not leaving God a voicemail. That he'll just, whenever he has time, he'll get back to you. No, it's the picture of the child walking into the parent's room and climbing up on the bed. And it's sitting and talking with the father for a while. And imagine walking into the room of the God of the universe, climbing up on the bed and thinking that you should go first. Thinking that your voice should be the loudest. Thinking that you need to say your piece and get everything off your chest. Thinking what you have to say is the most important thing. What I'm learning is that God has far more to say to me than I think I need to say to him. If I'll have a posture that listens with the intent of obeying, God, what do you want me to do in this circumstance? Not what do I want you to do, but what do you need from me? And I love it. That's what this woman does in verse 5. It very simply says, so she did as she was told. And as she does that, kind of some humanizing happens in my mind, right? I'm picturing this woman just walking around, knocking on a bunch of neighbors' doors, just asking for a whole bunch of Tupperware. And as she does that, I begin to realize that she probably has a reputation in her neighborhood. If her situation's as desperate as she's made it seem, this probably wasn't the first time she'd asked for help. People around her knew her circumstance, her situation. So she starts showing up at people's doors, just asking for any empty jars that she can find. And I'm sure she looked crazy to a lot of people. They knew she didn't have anything in her house, how desperate she was. What in the world could she need all of these oil containers for? And I have to believe, just reading the lines between the lines, that with every single knock, she began to ask the same questions in her own soul. What if this is a mistake? What if I'm going to look foolish? What if Elisha's wrong? What if I go get all these containers and there's no more oil than I already had? What if it's not going to happen? She's thinking, I know what little oil I have. It doesn't make any sense for me to have to go get all of these containers. And with every knock, she's questioning if this is actually going to happen. But here's what I want you to see. Even with all of those questions and all of that doubt, she collected the jars anyway. She still took the time to go prepare for what she wasn't totally sure was going to happen. You have to acknowledge your condition. You listen for God's direction, and I think you have to trust in God's provision. You trust in God's provision. There is a significant difference between believing that God can do something and believing that God will do something. Most of us in the room, I would hope, would say, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that God can't do something. But believing that he actually wants to and that he will is a different conversation. I love the picture James chapter 5 offers of a farmer planting seeds before he ever sees the first rain cloud. The farmer has a job to do, and he's all of that blood and that sweat and those tears that he's generated in all of his work goes straight into the ground with the seeds. And he knows that all of that work won't make a bit of difference without a whole bunch of rain. But he plants the seeds with the expectation of rain. Imagine if the farmer decides, you know what, I'm not totally sure it's going to rain this week, so I'm just not going to plant anything. And then God sends rain. You just get a whole bunch of mud. You get a mess. If God sends the oil and the woman doesn't have the containers for it, what do you get? A whole bunch of mess. This woman had to quite literally prepare for a miracle that she couldn't see yet. She had to prepare herself for what she wasn't able to comprehend in this very moment. There's a nugget I passed over a minute ago. In verse 2, when she uses the word and says, I have one small jar of oil, she uses a Hebrew word called asuk, and it means small flask, okay, individual size. When Elisha says, go get these containers from your neighbors, he doesn't use the same word. He uses a Hebrew word called kaleh, which means large storage containers. So the woman says to Elisha, this small jar is all I have. Elisha says, great, go get the biggest containers you can find and get a bunch of them. What's he saying to her? God is able to give you more than you're currently prepared to receive. So you better go get some jars. You better go prepare for God to provide. And so she did, as she was told. And verse 5 goes on and says, her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she filled one after another. Soon every container was full to the brim. Bring me another jar, she said to one of her sons. There aren't any more, he told her. And then the olive oil stopped flowing. And this is the kind of Inman commentary, just sidecar for a second. I think if she would have had another jar, that one would have been filled too. What am I saying? You will be filled to the degree of your openness. You'll be filled to the degree of your readiness for the Lord. I think it was Dr. Adrian Rogers that said this. I don't know how much of Jesus you currently have, but I know you have as much as you currently desire. You'll be filled to the degree of your openness. Now, there are some in the house today watching online or somewhere across the state, and life's gotten hard. The lights of your soul have gotten a little dim. There's something you're sitting in right now that you never dreamed it up on your own, that you would find yourself there. And so when we kind of zoom in on this story, it kind of rings a little bit hollow for you. I can believe that happened for her, that's her story, but I'm not sure what it has to do with my own story. There's something going on around you with someone around you in your own life that you're just looking at it going, hey, I know that God is big and God theoretically can do something, but I'm just not totally sure what I'm supposed to do with that right now. I'm not sure that God could even really redeem or fix any of this right this second. There's just too messy. There's too much going on. And to that person, can I just offer a simple word of hope? Just a line for you to grab, just even for today. There's a picture of how big God is found in verse number 7. Remember, the woman's fear at the very beginning of the story was what? It was the creditors. All she asked Elisha for was help satisfying her debt. That's all she needed. Her creditors were going to come take her sons away. That's my biggest problem. That's what I want help solving. And so verse 7 says, when she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, now sell the olive oil, pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left over. So not only did this woman receive enough to pay her debts, but she received more than what she asked for. She said, if you will help me pay off the debt that I owe, and God said, not only will I cover your debt, but I will give you a new way of life. And friends, this is the clearest picture of the gospel I've got today. We said, I have a debt in my own sin. Jesus not only pays that debt, but then he gives you enough to live on today. He says, I will be the one who sustains you in a difficult place. I will be your rock and your shield when the world caves in around you. I will be your light on dark days. I will be your abundant life. I had what you needed then, and I have what you need now, if you'll trust me for it. His name was Danny Simpson. Danny was 26 years old, living in Ottawa, Canada in 1990. He'd fallen on hard times. He was in a financial situation that was not getting better, owed a lot of people a lot of money, and he was in dire straits. And one day he decided, you know what, I've had it, I'm done. I'm taking matters into my own hands. I'm going to go do whatever I need to do to get this figured out. And so he loaded up a .45 caliber pistol that his father had left him when he died and took that pistol down to the local bank there where he used it to rob a bank. Made off with about $6,000 or so and ran away, got down the road a little bit, and the investigation commenced, and they figured out it was Danny. They went and tracked him down. Not only did they find all of the evidence they needed, but they found all $6,000, and they returned the money back to the bank and put Danny in prison. As they began to investigate and document all the evidence, one of the pieces of evidence was this pistol that he used. And one of the officers noticed that this pistol was not your normal kind of pistol. It was a very old, rare, kind of ancient looking pistol. And there was a guy in the police force that kind of specialized in weaponry. And so they took it to him and said, "Hey, have you ever seen this before?" And he said, "I can't believe what I'm holding." He said, "This gun is like almost 100 years old. They don't even make these anymore." And they took it to a local pawn shop there in Ottawa, and it turned out that gun was made in 1918 by the Ross Rifle Company. There was less than 100 of them in the world, and it was valued at over $100,000. If Danny Simpson would have understood the value of what his father left him, he never would have looked for it anywhere else. And friends, when you and I begin to understand the value of what our Father has for us, we'll stop looking for it everywhere else. We'll trust. We just sang it a minute ago, everything I need, my Father has it. And if that's true, that even in situations where you're frustrated, where you're angry, where you're confused, where you're hurting, and where you're weary, you can hold on to it. Because everything that you need is in the palm of his hand. And he's just saying, "Hey, let me come fill you up with honey from the rock. Let me show you resources that you know nothing about. If you'll rid your hands of everything else, open them up, and let me fill them." Can we pray that way this morning? In a room this size across all of our campuses and even online, there's no way that I could know the significance of situations that walked into the room with you. There's no way that I could know what's been happening around you, the darkness that might be creeping into your soul even right now. But I do know that we're sitting in the presence of a God who is all-knowing and who is bigger than we could ever imagine. And he is so far upstream, and he is not biting his nails over what's going on in your life, because he has it. And so maybe for you this morning, you find yourself in a place where, hey, the first step I've got to make is being honest about where I am. I've been the one who's been trying to figure it all out and trying to be my own solution. And I end up just creating more problems, and I just need to say I'm done. I need to say I've had it. I'm out of options, and I'm gonna raise my hand and ask for help. Maybe for others in the room, you're in that kind of second category where you've been asking God for something, you've been believing and praying, but you haven't really opened your ears up to what it is that God might want to say to you. What role do you play in the miracle you're asking for? And then maybe for somebody in the room, you're just in a place where you've got to go get some jars. You've got to go plant some seeds. The evidence of your faith has got to be worked out in your preparation for God's provision. And you need to seek the Lord to figure out what those seeds are. Wherever you might be today, can I just encourage you that he's closer than your next breath? And he's waiting for you and has been all along. And so, Father, for my friends in the room today, God, I'm thankful for your word and how it penetrates our hearts, how it shapes us, how it offers us hope in so many ways. And so today, would you give us courage? Would you give us boldness and awareness of what it is that we need to do with you. Would you give us courage to come talk to one of our friends at the front this morning, those that can pray with and encourage us? It can be a source of life and love and hope to us. God, would you just open us up in a way that only you can? Would you find us available and faithful? Even in this space, would you bring light to darkness and hope to hopelessness? Would you be who you said you'd always be? And would we trust it today? In Jesus' name, amen.